on in this. Thank you. So I'm ready and I'm here and I'm a little flustered. So feeling good in general though. Catherine, should we go next?
Okay, hi. I'm Catherine from Edina Community Lutheran, and this is my first conference call ever, so that's kind of exciting. I think I have the volume on. I'm in a good mood. I'm going to be working on my daughter's stocking as I listen in tonight. Stephanie, how about you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Seward from Unitarian Universalist Church of Minnetonka, and I am calm at the moment. I guess I'm bringing an openness to learning right now. And I will call on, let's see, Nicholas.
Hello, my name's Nick Tangen. I'm at University Lutheran Church of Hope, and I'm feeling just kind of tired today. I think all the cold to warm, just want to curl up. So glad to be here. Are there more people? I'm trying to see who's left.
Oh, this is a housekeeping thing. There's a couple ways to view it. So if you put it on speaker view, you can see who's speaking currently. And if you put it on gallery view, you can see everybody who's on there. Aspen, you can say hi one time. Say hi, everybody.
Hi.
This is Aspen. She'll be 4 on Sunday. Yeah, I think Adele and Katie and the person on the phone we haven't heard from yet. So feel free and tag somebody, Nick.
How about Adele?
Okay, I'm Adele Lenig. I'm from St. Luke Presbyterian. I have good energy today. I was able to get the Christmas tree up and all the other Christmas decorations done, and I'm feeling good about it. Oh, next is, I don't know who's next, Ashley. I'm sorry.
Let's go with Katie Williams.
I'm not sure I'm here.
Your voice is here. Your video doesn't appear to be on yet, but your voice is here, so feel free.
That could be because I don't know how to turn it on. I'm Katie Williams. I'm also St. Luke Presbyterian. And I didn't hear the question, but I gather it's how you're doing, how their day is going. And I guess I'm just glad that I've gotten this close to being on Zoom. So.
Hooray. And Katie, if you do want to turn your video on, there's a little camera icon at the bottom of your Zoom window that should say start video. And if you're webcam enabled, then it will start.
All right, I'll work on that. Thank you.
And then I missed the part of who is identifying themselves on the phone. So anonymous caller at 698-745, please tell us who you are.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, this is Nancy Lee Nelson. I'm from Calvary Lutheran Church at 39th in Chicago and Minneapolis. And I'm sorry I'm not on Zoom. I will do that next time. I'm not able to do it today. And I'm excited about talking about the power mapping, talking about the collusion and resistance and antidotes. And I'm just anxious to hear what everybody has to say and learning from you all. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Nancy. And I think that leaves me. I'm Ashley Horan. I am one of the organizers of the Sacred Solidarity Program, and I come to that as the executive director of MUSJA, the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance. Back to Dana.
Okay, so just a layout for our call. We're going to keep it to an hour. So the first portion will be a little bit shorter, I would guess, but just wanted to open it up for folks to do a little reflecting on the last retreat in particular, but even, if you have reflections or thoughts from the either of the first two retreats. We just want to check in and see how you're feeling after that, what kind of issues or questions might have come up for you since our time together last month. And then after this portion, we'll move on to the power mapping exercise and really give a little bit more time to that, since we have a chance to share and ask questions and look ahead. So let's see. Yeah, so let's just actually think about our last retreat. And last time we were together, we talked, actually we spent a good amount of time reflecting on the ways that anti-Semitism works in conjunction with anti-Blackness and white supremacy. And I know that was maybe not a conversation that we've all spent a lot of time on previously. So I wondered if there were things that have come up, questions or other reflections that have come up for any of you since then. And I guess we'll just facilitate this in the same way we did introductions. So I will pass to somebody, and if you don't have something immediately to reflect on or a question to ask, you can pass and say whoever comes next. And then we'll maybe have a second round if somebody else, if you all have other thoughts. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So let's see. How about Stephanie? Were you at the last, I should ask, were you at the November retreat?
Yes, I was.
Great. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing any thoughts or reflections or questions that have come up in that time or since that time.
Sure. Yeah, I've thought about a lot of it as far as the big picture. I don't have a specific question, but I thought it was a great, just a time of learning and having it established that it was okay for us to not be comfortable with knowing a lot about that subject, because I definitely didn't feel very confident in what I knew about anti-Semitism. So I appreciated that it was wherever we were at on that whole spectrum, we were okay to be there and to know as little or much as we did. Nobody needed to be an expert on it. And I liked it, that it was just an honest assessment of where we are right now and how can we think about this. And it was very valuable for me, I thought. I will call on Adele.
I got it. I found the anti-Semitism stuff to be quite illuminating. I had never thought about it. I'd never pulled the connection together before. And so I was very grateful for the information and for the opportunity. I've read a few of the many resources that were available. And each of them is they were very good choices. And they're each, I feel like I'm getting in a little deeper and a little deeper. It feels like a huge topic. And I'm sort of drinking from the fountain a little bit, but very important. It seems very important to me. How about Hannah?
Takes so much longer to unmute than I expect. I also was really grateful for that conversation. I have a couple good friends who are Jewish, and we have conversations every once in a while about their experience and what that's like. But to hear it from the Christian perspective of our role historically as Christians in oppression of Jews and all of that was really, yeah, I guess illuminating is a really good word for it. That definitely felt apt. And just some of the resources that I haven't had time to dig into yet, but the Doctrine of Discovery, and there were all those great ideas for tangible things you can do to learn more, and vocabulary you should know as you're having these conversations. That was really, really helpful. All right, from right to left, Nicholas is next, it looks like.
Yeah, we've been talking a bit about this at church, and particularly around being Lutherans and knowing that we have a particular need to talk about anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitism kind of at the roots of our tradition. And I think trying to figure out how to hold both the beautiful and the ugly parts of our tradition in healthy tension. And I think people find that, difficult, and it's stretching, and I'm not sure we're entirely sure how to hold that yet. But I think we're starting to have good conversations, and I was grateful for that to come up at the retreat and to spark some more questions. And knowing that the retreat happened not terribly long after like our Reformation Sunday and the shooting at the synagogue, and knowing that there had been all these kind of ongoing conversations about it. So yeah, I thought it was a good conversation. How about Catherine?
Hi, yes, I would just echo what everyone else has said. I did know some of that information before, but I was thinking tonight about that political cartoon that we shared, and I had also seen it and thought something about this doesn't feel right, but I hadn't really been able to name it, so I really appreciated the conversation that we had that at our last retreat. And our church, Edina Community Lutheran, we did meet with a small group to go over the collusions, and we discussed a lot of that again, just a couple Tuesday morning. And we're really taking it seriously about what songs and what lyrics that we want to have done in church, and just where can we go from here, honoring our tradition, but also being very aware of what is in our hymnal, especially. How about our phone caller? I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but I don't think you've gone yet.
That's Nancy.
It's Nancy. Thank you. Yeah, I think people have said a lot of my thoughts. One piece that it brought up for me was, it wasn't that long ago that the shooting happened in the Pittsburgh synagogue. And I was a member of the health center at the Jewish Community Center in St. Paul. And I'm not now, but I remember how when I went there, they talked about security. And I know that they've been looking at security again. So that brought up, that's still a hard time for me. I just don't know how these things happen in this country. And that's naive of me, I know, but anyway, that brought up that whole piece for me too. And let's see, who should I call on? Can't find my notes of names. Adele, have you gone?
Yeah, Adele went. If you are.
What about Katie? I don't think Katie's gone yet.
Okay, Katie. Katie Williams.
I don't know. I haven't done this Zoom before, so.
You're good. You're here. We can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay, that's all that matters. You don't need to see me. A lot of what's been said, I felt the same way. As it happened, I also was thinking very much about what happened in Pittsburgh, and I was particularly moved just recently to see a friend who is Jewish, and she said that soon after that happened, a dad and his young child came to her temple to bring flowers and express condolences, and that dad happens to be Muslim, and I was really touched by that. I've been impressed with how the Muslim organization, Council on American Islamic Relations, has been really strong at supporting and standing with Jewish people at this time. So that's just one little thing to add. And now I have to call on someone, or have we been all around?
Has anybody else not gone in this round? I think we're good.
We're good. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing. And I know that we'll continue to kind of unpack this and some of you mentioned the resources, and I encourage you to keep reading and being curious. I know that it's uncomfortable, like we've talked about in other ways, as we confront how white supremacy culture and now how anti-racism shows up in our own churches and our own theologies and our own framing. It's super uncomfortable because we're, being convicted by what we're encountering, but I encourage us all, each of us, to kind of, again, just practice that sitting with the discomfort and being able to kind of push ourselves into being, I'm inviting all of us to be more curious and open and keep exploring. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Ashley, who will lead us through some discussion of the power mapping exercise.
Yeah. So first, I just want to say that we know that this is a very busy time of year, and wherever you are in your progress on this, this is fine. We are not going to give anybody detention for anything, but we think this is a good entree into just sort of not only kind of using the tools and the framework to really get a grounding in how, not just how we understand racism out there, but how we understand racism intersecting with congregational culture specifically. And for all of you who are on this call, you are leaders in some way in those congregations that are trying to move things developmentally toward being really rooted in racial justice. We also recognize that our congregations in this cohort are in a wide variety of places in terms of work that has already been done, work that is even on the horizon already, where the sort of formation of your teams even is. So I think what we're interested in tonight is making sure that this is a time to sort of share our wonderings and to support one another in the discoveries that we're making, and to track the patterns, right? We have a number of different religious traditions represented here, and the common thread, the reason why all of your congregations are a part of the Sacred Solidarity Network, is that all of our congregations, regardless of religious tradition, are all institutionally and demographically predominantly white. And so there's a lot of commonality in terms of how that culture shows up, and it looks a little bit different depending on which, what kind of polity your congregation has or your theology. But one thing that I would encourage as we do our go around is to just listen for the patterns. What are people finding? What are the echoes across congregations and traditions? And then we'll do a little reflection at the end sort of about next steps. What's next? What do we do with this kind of learning? So I think our format is really going to be similar, kind of go around. And I think we're going to take, 2 or 3 minutes per person. So this is probably not a super deep dive, but what I would love for you to do is to just tell us a little bit about your process. What did you do with this homework? Who was involved in the conversations that you had? And what did you learn? And we'll do a similar thing. Well, I'll call whoever wants to go first can volunteer, and then you can call on the next person. So who would like to be our brave soul to go first? And would you please remind us again of your name and your congregation before you start speaking, so that Nancy on the phone can understand who's talking. Great. Hannah's going to go first.
All right, I'll get this out of the way. I'm Hannah from First Congregational Church. We have a really long email thread going back and forth with our racial justice team. So that's where most of the conversations happened. We did have an in-person meeting before the retreat last month, and that was a really great start. And so one other person and I sort of took the lead on starting to fill some of this in. We had sort of hashed through this more than I anticipated at our in-person meeting, which was nice. So putting it on the sheet, I guess, like officially hasn't really happened yet. But it was interesting to think about sort of how this layers as well. And the one that stuck out to me was defensiveness. And if we can get over the defensiveness of I'm fine, everything I'm doing is okay, yet I'm not doing something wrong, we can get through a lot of the other ones as well. And that has to, that question there of who would have to act to stop the collusion at every step of the way, like everybody. With defensiveness, everybody just needs to do that. The harder part, of course, then is how does that happen? What actual steps do we need to take? That's a lot more difficult. Like, do we talk to each other? Does it come from the top down? Does it come from, talking to people at coffee hour or during, sharing the piece at the beginning of the service? That's certainly more challenging to think about. How can you be less defensive when thinking about anti-Semitism and racism in our tradition? So is that sort of what you were looking for?
That was beautiful. What I'm interested in is also hearing some concrete examples. Like you guys talked about defensiveness. Mm-hmm. Did you talk about places where that is really showing up?
Yes. So we had asked the congregation to do the IDI last spring and summer. And we said our goal was 100 people. Great. That shouldn't be a problem. Well, only about 50 ended up doing it. And there was a resistance of like, no, I've already learned a lot about it. I don't need to know that information. And I don't know if we just didn't frame it properly, of like, we're trying to get, baseline data for our congregation. And I don't know if maybe the marketing could have been better. But there's definitely defensiveness of, no, I'm a good person. I think about this. I've read books about it. We talked about it in my book club, whatever. But asking them to take that extra step as a group in church, there's a lot of resistance. Whether people talked about it or not, and some people definitely did, but we got maybe 50. So that idea of there's something that's holding people back, and I think that's a lot of defensiveness to like, nope, it's fine, I don't need to know. So, or I already know, I guess, is probably the case in a lot of people.
That's great. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was a beautiful illustration of exactly the kind of check-in I think we want to look for. Hannah, you just talked about the IDI. Do you want to just say real quickly what the IDI is so that anybody who doesn't have that context can know?
Yes, sorry. So the Intercultural Development Inventory is a tool that was originally created for businesses to sort of help them figure out how they deal with difference, I think is the official framing that they use. And I've learned about it in some of my grad school classes, and it's a really interesting exercise. It's a self-assessment. There are questions, and then there are official staff people through this organization that will sit down with either you individually or you as a group to talk about where you are on this spectrum of how well you deal with difference in personal interactions and in your everyday life. It's a really interesting tool.
Beautiful. Thank you. You want to call on the next person?
Absolutely. The next person on my little video gallery view up there is Stephanie. Do you want to go next?
Okay, I am Stephanie, and again, I'm from Unitarian Universalist Church of Minnetonka, and we have a group of 5 of us involved in the Sacred Solidarity Network, and our small group of 5 is part of a larger team within our church called Social Justice Ministry. And so, and that is fairly new, being formed within the past few months. I joined that a few months ago, and we're just kind of rolling that out and figuring out what we're doing and where we're going to go with it and all of that. So it's really nice to be having this happening at the same time with how we want to roll this out in our church. And now we get to figure out what we want to roll out and what we want to learn and then what we want to pass on. So this is nice to be in conjunction. Our process was to find a day that worked for all of us, which happened to be yesterday, and we met for lunch. It was about a 2-hour meeting, And so we had all kind of done a little bit of thinking and homework since the first and second retreats and going through collusion and antidotes and the readings. And so we just started kind of talking and finding where we wanted to start. The tricky part was probably trying to narrow down where we wanted to even start as far as the power mapping. We had so many places we could go with it. It was hard for us to narrow down. And then the other tricky piece was finding the complexity as far as thinking of an example and not knowing where it fit, because one of us would say that's power hoarding and one of us would say no, that's paternalism, and trying to put labels on all of our examples. And we started to realize this is too complex to be that's that one and that's that one. There's so many areas where it's a whole bunch of them at once. So it's interesting to know that you can't put it all in a little box, and there's not going to be a one-to-one mapping of any of it. It's lots of things happening, and it creates a lot of good discussion about all of the different layers involved in each problem or opportunity that we're looking to solve in our congregation. So that was where we started. So we did choose one antidote and one collusion, and specifically worked on those yesterday. And we're going to meet again before our next group and hopefully do a few more.
Stephanie, would you also do us the favor of just sharing like maybe one concrete example, like a little anecdote of a thing that you talked about that maybe fits into 7 or 8 of these different categories?
Sure. One that we came up with was the issue and maybe the problem of the minister leaving in the last year. Our minister left, and that created a host of things happening within the congregation, and a lot of different feelings and a lot of different people figuring out, or trying to figure out why that happened and who made that happen, who is responsible, and what do we do. And there was, I think, a lot of misinformation being spread, and some people perceived it to be the decision of some people at the top, some people of influence, and that sort of thing. And so they decided that was paternalism, but also labeled that kind of power hoarding and individualism. I can't think of what else we put in that category, but all of those things came together in being the solution was to create more transparency and to create more of a process that involved more people and more communication and all of that to avoid all of the questions and gossip and everything floating around and everybody thinking they had the answers when nobody had the full picture.
Yeah. And one thing I would just lift up from your example there, Stephanie, is so white supremacy culture certainly shows its ugly head when we're dealing with specific with the involvement of people of color in our congregations, right? Obviously. But also it lives systemically in the institution, even when it is not specifically an issue about race or involving people of color, right? So, I'm familiar with a little bit of the context of your congregation, Stephanie, and this is a white minister who left a predominantly white congregation. And so it's kind of on the surface, that's one of those places where people are like, oh, well, that's not actually the issue that we're dealing with. And when you have certain behaviors that are endemic to white supremacy culture, it screws up a whole lot of other stuff too, right? It turns out that perhaps those behaviors are not the most healthy for everybody, including the white people and white institutions that embody them. So I love that example.
Yeah.
Call on our next person.
Sure. How about Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine, and I'm from Edina Community Lutheran. I think we have about 12 people who've been at the retreats, and our group has found it useful to use the Doodle app to take a survey of how to meet. And so this time around, we did one morning session of 2 hours, and there's another group doing an evening session of 2 hours. And so out of my group, which was 7 people, we had our top 3 things that we wanted to focus on, and then we really just talked a lot about power hoarding. And one of the things that I thought was great that came out of our discussion was to reframe it as not power sharing. So maybe that fits into defensiveness too. So when we are trying to discuss things, just to be a little bit more like we need to share the power versus you're hoarding the power. And of course, on our committee, we have a lot of people who do other committees. And so there's always discussion about how many groups are there and how are we talking to each other and who has what relationships. And we talked a little bit, well, first of all, I'm going to stumble here because as a group, we did decide that a lot of the things that we talked about in our conference room that we would keep somewhat confidential just because it allowed us to maybe use shorthand talk and say, well, you know, it's not all personal or it's not all this person, but we are going to talk about this position within our church. So one thing we talked about that was great was just how we could maybe help revamp our monthly groups. And there's already somebody on it, and just both looking to the past, how it used to be, about making it more about community and less about the actual work, while also really respecting that the work needs to get done. Gosh, I don't know what to keep going on, but if Ashley wants to jump in.
That was great. You did great.
Thanks.
Pass it along. Thank you.
And you know, I think we all have a different order of the way the names are popping up on our screen. So it might be kind of hard to remember who needs to go next. Did Nicholas go yet?
I can go. So I wasn't at the first retreat and missed that first round of homework doing the power mapping, but we had a group that got together this last week to talk specifically about collusions and antidotes and the way that's kind of worked out. And there were a couple things that I thought were really interesting. One was the difference in the way collusions were perceived based on your role in the congregation. So having talking about worship with the pastor and the worship director and congregants, the difference in where we see collusions happening was pretty stark, and I thought that was interesting. And then just in various leadership roles, people who had been on vision and governance maybe didn't perceive paternalism in the way that people who hadn't been did perceive it, and so that made the discussion really interesting. It was also interesting to me, we spent a lot of time talking about perfectionism, while also kind of circling the conversation, trying to figure out which collusion do we need to talk about. I mean, really trying to get the collusions done perfectly, just so was so ingrained. We were like, which one is it? I don't know. We have to really figure out which one this is. One of the things we ended up with, one of the concrete examples was thinking about our worship. And there is this kind of perception that, Hope is a place that has a standard of excellence in worship, whatever that means. And a very kind of high quality music, good preaching, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in the last year we've started, we put a craft table out for our kids in worship so that they have a way to participate in worship. But what that also means is that during the sermon and during the rest of the liturgy, kids are kind of coming and going, sometimes just walking, across the altar and doing their thing, but engaging. And there was this kind of initial pushback, this was disruptive, but over the course of the year, people have really come to love it. And it's just the sight and the sound and the rustling and the bustling and the energy. And it's been a way that I don't think we acknowledged that kind of the white supremacist root of that, but as we started to talk about where have been some antidotes to this perfectionism, that was a place where we really saw it, where it was oh yeah, we all of a sudden, watching kids walk in front of the pastor while she's preaching, we're kind of cool with, and we're all looking at each other oh, isn't that great? So it's kind of surprising where we didn't want to give ourselves credit, where we kind of wanted to just keep on hitting ourselves over the back and saying we're really not doing anything, woe is us. It was good to have a conversation where we could lift something like that up. Yeah. Next, Adele.
Okay. Well, we met yesterday to talk about the Power Making at Home, to kind of start on the homework. And we had a very interesting discussion about how overlapping and related so many of the collection items are. And we decided that we'd like to approach it, unless you have guidance for us, Ashley and Dana, that says that's not a good approach, is that we really felt like we could boil it up into a couple of big issues that are facing. And so we focused on one, and maybe it's the only one we really want to focus on now, which is that the group, which is me and Brennan and Katie, who's also on the phone, and Susan's, we believe that our congregation needs to admit that we deny, avoid, and minimize our complicity in white supremacy culture. And a lot of what Hannah said resonated with me. I mean, the folks at St. Luke are good people, and they're not racist people, you know, they're not white nationalist people or anything, but they are kind of like, I think we've done that. I don't need that, you know, I'm not, you know, I don't see color or whatever so their level of denial is, we think, pretty high. The primary reason we know that is we did do a whole push last year about Time for the Truth. And, you know, we did the book study and the discussions afterwards. And Katie, who led a lot of those discussions, heard pretty strongly the messaging of, you know, we don't really need this is kind of old news for us. And, you know, I know that I've benefited from being white, but I'm not contributing. I'm not being a racist. So we talked a lot about how on earth would we get around that, or get people to look into their hearts and see if they would be willing to examine that more carefully and closely. And we decided maybe we could try a fairly exhaustive program around asking the congregation to answer the question, how are we complicit in the racism that exists in our world? And we don't have the perfect language on that question yet, but you get the sort of drift. And so we did talk about the fact that was kind of a right in their face kind of an approach, right? As opposed to, should we be a little bit more subtle? Should we try and kind of come at it through how can we better partner with, because we work with a lot of communities of color in our peace and justice work. How can we partner with them better? You know, try and make it more carrot than stick. But our instinct right now is to try and really flesh out this idea of the more direct approach. And if the answer that the congregation comes up is we're not complicit, well, that's an answer. And we could, you know, we'll see what happens there. I kind of seriously doubt that. But so then we spent the rest of the time kind of fleshing out and starting to talk about what would that look like. You know, in my imagination, it's about a 2-year program. Maybe we could get it done in 1 year. But, you know, the kinds of things we would need to do. So one thing I would love to hear from people is either through email or on this call or however is, you know, if you were challenging yourself to take that kind of question to your congregation, how are we complicit in the racism that exists in our world? What kinds of things would you do to try and get your congregation through denial, avoidance, and minimalization?
Just so happens that we're going to be talking to you in the next month or two about a congregationally based program for addressing these issues that we're piloting here in the Twin Cities this spring. And I'll leave it there, but we've got some ideas.
I knew you would. I knew you would, Ashley. We're so happy to be a part of this group, because to have to go and try and figure that out on our own, I just can't imagine.
Nobody needs to reinvent the wheel. It turns out that lots of people are thinking about this, and all of us can benefit from the learning that's been happening.
Cool.
Beautiful.
Great.
So you've spoken for both you and Katie. Thank you for representing your congregation. And then I think that leaves Nancy. Yeah?
I'm Nancy Lee Nelson from Calvary Lutheran Church. Our group is the Racial Equity Steering Committee at Calvary, and we decided we wanted to be not just a church doing racial equity, but to be part of Sacred Solidarity and a number of churches and temples, because you would bring more resources to us, and we just want more of a community approach. We try to set up programming. We've talked about our programming for this year with books and speakers and movies and discussions. Some of the activities are on a Sunday, so they're part of an adult educational forum. So that's just our members. And then other times, for example, this movie we showed the movie Black Panther, and we had popcorn and water and some other drinks, and the surrounding community was all invited in, and then our plan was to have a good discussion. Our discussion was pretty weak, but we're working on those things. And we've done the IDI, and our church council is going to do the IDI, and next we'll introduce it to our church members. I have to say that I thought I got white privilege and white supremacy, and recently chose Martin Luther King's last book called Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And by reading that book, I realized how much I had to learn about white privilege and white supremacy. So sometimes I think it's tough to even if you ask the direct question, I'm not sure that I sometimes think it's a process, and I think I was surprised for myself that I still had a lot more to learn. So, I don't know. I've noticed I can be quite direct, and I can be also not so direct and just listen and maybe ask some open-ended questions. And I feel like when I do that, more things come out, But who knows? Somebody else probably has better ideas than that. In our group, we've talked about the power mapping. Our group has met to talk about it, but we've divided it up, and we're all doing certain parts of it, and then we'll come back together on December 10th and then try to put it together. I'm sure we won't get that done in one night. I've been working on defensiveness and paternalism, and specific to our church, one piece of defensiveness, our members respond with defensiveness to new ways of changing tradition in our church, even when they know it makes the church more inclusive. And we have been trying to bring in many cultural musical traditions. We sing some Jewish songs, we sing some African songs. We have a person who has been to Africa a number of times, is a great musician, and he's led us, and we have other people like that. And for some people, not just the older ones, but for some people that's really tough. The Lutheran Church has a lot of traditions and a lot of songs that they're used to. And I love the new songs. They're much easier to sing. I'm not a person who has one of those great voices, that can sing all the Lutheran songs. So I think it's great. But it's hard for other people, especially when they've been, in this church for 50 years or something. And the church seems also focused sometimes, not so much with our new pastor, but sometimes on being very careful not to hurt members' feelings, and worrying about making changes too quick that may result in members becoming defensive. So for antidotes right now, the things I've been thinking about are utilizing non-judgmental communication and good listening with open-ended questions to concerns. And that seemed to work best for me at this point. But I'll try the more direct approach too, because sometimes I get very frustrated that it's taking so long to bring change about. And so sometimes I want to be even more direct so that things change faster. And I do worry that that we're doing something. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. died 50 years ago this year. And in this book, he talks about the time is now for change. The time is now for action. And that if we don't do it soon, 50 years ago he said this, well, 51 years ago he said it in the book. If we don't make this change, pretty soon we're not going to be able to do it. And so I don't have the answers, and that's part of why I want to be with Sacred Solidarity. And I don't mean that everybody else has the answers or Sacred Solidarity has the answers, but I know that when we have a wide group of people like this, we get more discussion, and I think that approach brings you closer to things that work because there are people with other experiences. So anyway, I'm going on too long. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Nancy. Thank you. Let's just take a couple of seconds and kind of popcorn style, whoever feels moved to respond. What are the patterns you're seeing? What are the things that are common across our congregations? And what new questions are coming for you as you hear the reflections of your cohort siblings? Yes.
Hi. Well, I think a lot of us are feeling that on one hand, I want to be bold and aggressive and get things done, but we're very aware of being resistance and the language that matters a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big piece about what is developmentally appropriate for the congregations that we're in. And so I'm hearing a lot about like beginning to kind of get a baseline, right, in your congregation, sort of beginning to understand, well, we might have outlying individuals, or we might have, you know, one group that really has done some work on this, but sort of seeing the patterns throughout the whole congregation, and then figuring out, given the culture of our congregation, given where the majority of people are, what are, you know, where do we even start? What's the appropriate intervention? That's a thing that the IDI, the Intercultural Developmental Inventory, talks a lot about, is that you have to understand where somebody is developmentally in order to, and then apply the appropriate interventions in order to get them to move. And if you apply the wrong interventions, you can actually get people to regress. So if you use kind of, you know, if you're too aggressive or if you're not aggressive enough, and I actually don't really like that word so much. Let me try another one. If you, it's just about using the right tools at the right time, right? But if you're miscalculating, sort of like the whole congregation, yeah, we think we're super ready for this, and then let's say you hire a new African American director of Christian education or something, and it turns out that the congregation is not ready for that, there's going to be backlash against that may actually make the congregation even more skittish about doing that work in the future. So part of what we're going to be talking about over the next several months of this program is sort of like, with the assessment of where our congregations are, what are some of the developmentally appropriate things that we should be leading. That's great. Other reflections?
Makes sense.
The words that I wrote down as I was listening were communication and perceptions. I feel like a few of us talked about that and how we communicate and how people think we're communicating and how we think people are communicating, and just sort of overcoming that. And as like self-appointed leaders that we are in our congregations, being able to be really uncomfortable in communicating and making sure that you we sort of clear out the misperceptions. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot as we're chatting here.
Yeah. Yes. There's also a thread that accompanies that too about something that is sort of Midwestern white culture around really being worried about hurting people's feelings. And like, if we were in a different region of the United States, we might be having a very different conversation about like, actually our problem is that we're too aggressive and everybody's being too, confrontational. But one piece of specifically white Midwestern culture is real indirect talk around things, and understanding that just as a piece of culture. And so when to use that cultural moire as a tool to know that it's going to work better than a different style of communication, versus when to disrupt that cultural norm in order to create change. Absolutely. Any last reflections of patterns or things you're hearing?
Just a quick comment. And I would say in our congregation, it's maybe less defensiveness and less resistance, and more about a lot of us wanting to say, we want to do something now. We want to jump into the social action and we want to get out there and do something radical. And we sometimes forget the piece of the important thing of doing is creating our awareness and figuring out where we're at and what we need to learn before we need to go do something for someone. We need to do that inner work. And I think that's the piece that we need to really focus on and remember, is how important that inner work and early work is before we jump into the big stuff that sounds like we're doing something.
Right, and potentially cause harm or perpetuate that white supremacy culture if we haven't worked on it.
Exactly.
And I think that's a great place to end, because it's a both and, right? It's like we can't spend our entire lives thinking and learning and spinning our wheels, because that also is a symptom of perfectionism, right? Of like, we have to get it right before we can go do anything. And it's a way of getting ourselves off the hook. The flip side is that when we move too quickly into action without really being in accountable relationship with communities of color, with, activists who are leading movements for social change and racial justice, we can actually do more harm than we would if we just kept ourselves within our own walls, right? And so that's why we like to talk about this cycle of praxis as action that we do together, and then we do reflection about what we have learned from that action, and there's some feedback involved in that too, right, from outside partners who've been in collaboration with us. And then some more learning, right? So action, reflection, learning, action, reflection, learning. The idea is that it's a spiral, right, that continues, and hopefully we're not making the same mistakes over and over again. The reality is that there will always be mistakes that we're making, but hopefully we're learning from them and making different ones next time, And I think on that note, Dana, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, thanks. This was great. I appreciate everybody sharing and just getting to hear a little bit about your process and also some of your findings. And we look forward to continuing to dig deeper and learn more and make more mistakes, but to learn more. So just a logistics note, there will be another call in January. And I should know the date off the top of my head, but I don't. So look for an email. It is in your binder, the date. But I will send out, reminders. And so same kind of format. We'll have the Zoom call. It'll probably be different facilitators next time, so you'll get, a different couple of folks. And then I will just keep working on those, the power mapping exercise. So keep digging into the ways that, those collusions and antidotes. And then, so then by the time we all come together in February, the hope is that those exercises have been, fairly well fleshed out. So we can continue to talk about those, but like in the larger setting. We have recorded this call, so we'll make that available somehow. I leave that to Ashley, who knows more about Zoom, but we'll share it. And then again, for next month, if it's you as representatives from your team, or if you want to tag somebody else for next month's call, we just ask that at least one person be on the call. And if more than one person is able to join, you have, identified ahead of time a spokesperson. So you don't feel like you're like, oh, should I say that? I don't know. What are you going to say? But kind of work it out ahead of time. And I just want to also invite all of us, as you reflect on the retreats and on our conversation and whatever, like, don't be shy about reaching out with questions or reflections or feedback, and whether it's logistical feedback or, content feedback. We're super open to that, and we really want this to be a co-created experience for all of us, because we're all learning. There's no like super deep experts. Maybe some of us have had more opportunity to make mistakes and learn from them, but yeah, so definitely open. You have email contacts for all of us, so feel free. Ashley, was there something else that I should mention?
No, I think that's great. Watch your email. Thank you so much for being on the call and for participating and sharing your learning. Happy holidays, whichever of them you are celebrating in this season of so many. And we will talk to you again in January in the next year. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.